Hello. Let me welcome everyone who has joined us for this online discussions. My name is Victor Kipiani. I'm the chair for policy-based analytical think tank Geocase. The subject of these discussions is the never-ending matter on the Georgian side and the Georgian political life, which is always a saga attracting attention from the moment of gaining independence, changes in the electoral system and election reforms. So this time we have insightful people who have joined our panel, who gave us some very interesting clues and interesting guide. What distinguishes this time, this next chain of changes to the Georgian election reform, how it helps us to advance Georgian political culture, how it gives us a boost to make a big step toward European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And therefore, before of the mystic of the election reform, we give such a name implications. Implications is the connotation which always provide, with some good message, but the message which is sometimes very hard to define in precise lines. So we'll try to complete our discussions in 1 hour. Therefore, I would kindly ask all the panelists to be time mindful. And therefore, let me start with presenting Mr. Kutchava. Although, let me present all the panelists. It's Kutchava, who is a vice speaker of the Parliament of Georgia. Kakha was extensively involved into all the tempest in a teapot, which was related to the election reform and the constitutional changes. We also have the two representatives of Geocase, Dr. Khatuna Burkadze and Mr. Bacho Tortladze. And we have our special guest and special speaker, who is Ketevan Chachava, who is the head of the prominent and well-known Georgian think tank and Georgian Ender platform, which is the sector number 3, if I'm not mistaken. Let us start, and Kakha, very warm welcome to you. Your in-depth knowledge will be very educating and provide us with a good knowledge, but most importantly, it will give our audience once again a deep and good insight, what has happened behind the curtain and what is happening now, which we don't see or we fail to see. So Kakha, please, you have a go ahead. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
We are one of the the best worldwide in terms of ranking as being one of the most open parliaments. So there's nothing happening behind the curtains. We're trying to push everything straight forward to everyone, including the online platforms, which we use quite often to make sure that information is well disseminated. Dear Victor, thank you very much for inviting me. And first of all, and second of all, I'm really happy that I'm part of this discussion because we don't see much of a think tank in Georgia, and at the same time, such discussions organized by think tanks in our country. So it's my pleasure to be one of the first to be part of this online discussion, especially on the topic which really catches the momentum for the country's development. It's been named so that it's by our international partners and locally that it's a historical change, the historical reform and historical day, the voting day, which assured that the next parliamentary election on this, October 31st will take place based on the agreement that was reached with the wider consensus, including not just political parties and not just the parliamentary political parties, but the outside political parties from the parliament and the bigger society, especially the activists and all the different non-governmental organizations. Which is most important. I know every single Georgian knows by heart now all these 4 facilitating ambassadors who played the vital role in achieving this agreement. United States ambassador, German ambassador, ambassador of the European Union, and the Council of Europe head of the office. Why it is important and why it is a historical? It is a question that no one asks, but let me just say a couple more words. We all know the history. I'll start from the beginning. I think it will be interesting for you and those who listen to hear that I've been one of those, and we've been quite a lot, who even starting from 2016, when we've been elected 4 years ago, we had this idea of making the constitutional changes and switching to the fully proportional system, fully parliamentarian system, I would say. There have been a number of big gaps in the constitution which needed to be reflected on the right way and changes to be made. But it was fundamental that the ruling party, finally, we've been the first one who made this type of changes, because previously a lot of promises been made, but never fulfilled. And we did this, although the changes would have been affected, fully proportional from 2024 parliamentary elections. And after after last year's events in June, it's been made the announcement that party will vote for proportional system for 2020, and unfortunately, a number of MPs did not vote, so the changes failed, the voting failed, and the momentum gathered around this event, whether the ruling party was ready or was really up to it to make these changes for 2020 elections. That's why it caught too many attention, and I remember the skepticism by many that ruling party wouldn't have been able to finally make these changes happen. We had very interesting months ahead. Negotiations, discussions, and important not just outside but inside the party as well, because there've still been a couple who've been very much against these changes, and one of from 93, one MP still didn't vote, but we said and we made it happen that 92, as it was promised, all of them voted in favor of these changes, which has been the number one requirement of the 8th March agreement. But relevantly important was the second component of the 8th March agreement, which was the changes in the election code itself, which was based on the OSCE ODIHR recommendations. And in both cases, ruling party made sure that almost within 1 week time, we've been able to vote positively for these changes. And we've received a lot of praising from our international partners, congratulations. And not because proportional system or majoritarian system is better to each other and etc., but because it was a huge achievement considering the importance of this polarized pre-election situation being, tension being eased, and our foreign partners finally being assured that country is going on the right direction. This is the political battle which we're going through. Of course, it was very unfortunate that two big opposition parties, besides the fact of being signatories to 8th March agreement, did not vote. They said they supported these changes, but they're not voting for these changes, which is kind of a new joke which can be used in other occasions, considering that if you support it, you have to vote for it. So, but that's why it was a lot of criticism that they received, but that doesn't matter right now. We've been able to secure these changes. Changes are there, and we will be able to finally have the proportional elections closest to the full proportional by 2020 and full proportional by 2024. There are a number of other important topics which needs to be mentioned relevantly well. First of all, this is the 40% threshold, which means that the fear from the opposition that if party gets less than 40%, which they meant Georgian dream, but just being the majority would secure for themselves the parliamentary majority, will be avoided, considering that any political party has to gather minimum or above the 40% of the votes to being able to form the government, which is very interesting, very much pro-democratic, and importantly, the change that I don't believe any other ruling party would have been able to set this up, because what you do in this regard is you create the rules which might play against you. But we think this is the right decision, and this was part of the agreement to help ease the tension between the political groups. I have to undermine, and I'll stop there, one more achievement. There are many other things to include in these changes, but personally to me, being one of my lobbying these changes very much, this is the gender quota. I was very unhappy when about 2 years ago, Parliament didn't vote positively for this law, but within the electoral code reform and changes, we've been able to secure every fourth person candidate in the party list to be the different gender representative. And by 2024 elections, it will be every third person. So this will secure us approximately minimum 30% of participation or representation in the parliament of women, which makes me even more proud because of this parliament being the one who finally made these changes in the law. There are many other things to talk about, but I'm sure there will be questions, so I'll be happy to answer whatever there will be questions.
Thank you, Kakha. Also, you spoke extensively on behalf of the ruling party, but I also always appreciate your unbiased view and unbiased opinion. That gives a special credit. So therefore, I was not thinking possible, who to invite. And thank you so much indeed for your honesty and your responses and assessment. Thank you so much. So let me switch to Dr. Burkadze, who is a research fellow at Geocase. Khatuna has so many titles that I will give a very brief highlight. So she did at Fletcher School, she did at Tufts University, she did at Harvard University, she was a Fulbright scholar, she held various positions at Prime Ministerial Office, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Parliament, Supreme Court of Georgia. So Khatuna, all the credits for you. So please decide, from your perspective, your views, your statements, your opinion, please. Thank you so much for joining us.
Dear Victor, thank you for inviting me as a speaker. I'm honored and delighted to speak about the importance of the electoral reform of Georgia. Before analyzing importance of this issue, firstly, I would like to talk very briefly about some historical background of our country. We know that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia restored its political independence, and the collapse of the Soviet Union was the starting point for our transformation process. Simultaneously, we realized that in years we have very close cooperation with our partners, with the United States, with the European Union, NATO, and other partners in order to transform our political, economic, as well as legal systems in compliance with Western values. Georgia continues to implement reforms through support of partners. Yes, in June 2020, the Parliament of Georgia adopted the constitutional amendments and took a significant step toward the parliamentary pluralism for the 2020 parliamentary elections. And these changes should bring greater stability and political pluralism, because we realize that we are parliamentary democracy, and this means that we need appropriate measures. Sorry?
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead.
We need appropriate measures in order to enhance a parliamentary system. When we talk about proportional system, these, constitutional changes give us a more proportional electoral system in order to provide greater political participation in the representative body. And this means that political parties learn cooperation, will learn cooperation through deliberation and consent in the future, and through this process we will enhance our procedural democracy. The law aims to prevent over-representation in the representative or representation of the powers in the representative body on the one hand, and on the other hand it tries to establish a tool to help prevent any one party from gaining enough power to rewrite constitution independently. And at the same time, these changes give very important opportunity to minor groups, because the threshold for a party to make it into parliament has been reduced to just 1%, and this means that through these changes we can give opportunities to minor groups, and this means that we can enhance parliamentary pluralism in the representative body in the future. At the same time, we realize that based on constitutional amendments of 2017, 2018, starting from 2024, the parliamentary elections will be based on the fully proportional system. And this fully proportional system, of course, will enhance our democracy in the future as well. In this context, of course, it's essential to analyze statements of our partners. According to the joint statement of our facilitators, Western diplomats congratulate the Parliament of Georgia on the adoption of these constitutional amendments. They recognize that these amendments reflect compromise of political parties. At the same time, they regret the non-participation of some parties due to differences over the fulfillment of the March agreement. The US State Department has welcomed these constitutional amendments. The European Union has supported these constitutional amendments. The members, in particular, member of the European Union, Marina Kaliurand, has welcomed these changes. And she emphasized that these changes are a milestone for Georgia's political life. In the response to these amendments, Freedom House issued statement. We read in this statement that these amendments reflect willing of Georgia's public and civil society organizations, because we know that they demanded reforms through months-long campaigns. According to the statement of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, we can find out that these amendments can give a new window opportunity to Georgia. At the same time, authors of this statement has highlighted the following sentence: we call on all stakeholders to refrain from any action or any statement that can increase tensions during elections, because we need stable environment for development process of our country. In terms of transforming electoral system, I would like to emphasize some important components of the reform package. The reform package contains measures to increase women's political participation, strengthening third-party financing regulations in order to provide greater transparency in this process. And we know that it's so important for the fair elections. I strongly believe that these reforms could bring a more stable environment for our country. This decision reflects our best interest because it reflects the willing of Georgian population on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's considered valuable by the partners. We know that these amendments should be a precondition for, maintaining our accomplishments and continuation of our reforms on Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic path in order to achieve our greater goals in the future, to become a full member of European and Euro-Atlantic structures. I believe that we will illustrate again that we are committed to Western values, and Georgia is committed to Western values, and Georgia is a defender of liberty, fairness, and transparency. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Khatuna. You gave us a very good snapshot assessment of what was happening beyond Georgia's borders when it comes to the election reforms here. And that is very important because the viability of Georgian democracy, it very much depends on the willingness of Georgian people, but it also requires an acknowledgement and a proper acknowledgement by international audience. And your statements, were very, very helpful. Let me go to Bacho Tortladze. Bacho is, in my view, the most important person at the Tbilisi City Hall because he's entrusted with the environmental purity of the city. But beyond that, he is a well-respected lecturer, and I observed myself, how youngsters like him and how much they respect him. So Bacho, as we're saying, not in Georgia, but beyond Georgia, the floor is yours. And you have many other credentials, but I would spare the time for your presentation rather than reading the credentials which you have, so please do.
Thank you, Victor, for this very nice introduction. Good afternoon to my fellow speakers. Good afternoon, everybody watching us. I would like, first of all, to join my colleagues in acknowledging the importance of sweeping election reforms recently conducted by the Parliament of Georgia. By constitutional changes, Georgia got the most proportional system since it ever had since 1990. However, political clashes, the lack of consensus, and deep polarization hindered me from fully joining the process. Generally speaking, there is no perfect election system for all the countries, but every state picks its preferential model based on its geography, politics, economy, social or cultural aspect. The advantages of proportional system to Georgia and its relevance has been widely discussed by political actors and NGOs already for years. One of the key features of proportional system, in addition to fair representation of people in the legislative organ, is a responsibility to cooperate with other political actors and also to share a burden of political power. Unfortunately, we have seen the failure of constitutional agreement in the parliament, which significantly harmed the spirit of constitutional unity that could this amendment bring to entire country. Here I want to emphasize tremendous work of diplomatic corps to facilitate this entire process, and I think it is obvious that without their engagement, the failure of March 8th agreement would have been inevitable. However, I think that it is a shame of Georgian politicians that they cannot reach to an agreement on the major constitutional issues without the engagement of third parties. And I think dealing with constitutional issues, including making a compromises through consensus, through compromises, should be their exclusive responsibility. And it is crucially important to realize what the consequences might be in case this agreement fails. I think that political mandate given by Georgian people primarily includes making of the decisions and coming to an agreement in the institutional format. So regardless of wherever Georgian politicians, in whatever format they may come to an agreement on whatever constitutional topics, it is essential to resemble this in the constitution and to vote in favor of the constitutional challenges. Otherwise, I would just be quite rush and say that it is like running away from the responsibility, and I don't think that this is the mandate and this is the expectation of Georgian electoral system and the Georgian voters in general. If we take orders and paces report issued after the presidential election in 2018 into consideration, we will easily conclude that one of the major problems of the Georgian election is deep polarization of society and high political temperature. And I think whatever amendments or changes Georgian parliament passes, it will be everything futile unless we manage to agree on the same games, on the rules of the game, unless we manage depolarization, and this is the primary responsibility of politicians on media's role as well. And this report highlights some very unfortunate facts that superficial coverage of election campaigns, as well as the bias, did not let Georgian voters make informed decisions. I strongly discourage any interferences in the media's work by the government, especially by using legislation. But I think despite the political affiliations that most Georgian media outlets have, they still have this resource to set some ethical standard that could ensure balanced coverage of entire election campaign. And if we look at the report, Georgian Public Broadcast is mentioned as one of the organizations which managed covering these topics in a very balanced way. So I think if they show some self-initiative together and set some standards that could really advantage to entire political system. And just to finalize my points, I think that again, without agreeing on the basic roles, without making clear standards and draw the red lines, it will be very difficult to develop Georgian election system and ensure the democratic development of this country. Thank you.
Well, I guess I can just take over as our moderators seem having technical issues. It is a great pleasure to join this very interesting discussion, and I honestly believe that, you know, due to pandemic or COVID, I think it's a great success. We all have to celebrate that election reform has continued without stopping the process. I remember us being online as members of the working groups, as well as the part of the parliamentary discussion groups, as representatives of the observer organization, as Center for Development and Democracy has been domestic observer for over 10 years now. And we have been involved in almost every reform process that has been taking place for the last 10 years. It is a great pleasure and honor to be able to speak and be kind of proud as well from our side, because we believe that certain points of the reform has also been actively advocated, and I would call lobbied by our organization, that has been now a part of the legislation reform. Therefore, first of all, let me also apologize if there's going to be any sounds coming from my surroundings, because I'm joining you from Burkadze. And actually, we are now here discussing also our plans, like how we do observation, how we actually tackle the COVID and the pandemics. But before I do that, even though my previous speakers have been following or underlining several big achievements of this reform, I would also like to underline several of them, because I honestly believe this is a very important step. First of all, to congratulate the Parliament on passing this important piece of legislation, which I believe is really crucial, and taking into consideration the polarized situation. Bacho has underlined really well about the political polarization as well as the media polarization, which of course reflects in the wider challenge for the society. So therefore, and for the voters. So therefore, I believe it is crucial to show to the public when there is a political consensus, which we have seen when it comes to election system change, that I think sometimes we need to hear from all the sides that this is a success and this is important achievement, and now is the time to proceed with its implementation. I believe the election system is actually the core of the election environment. For many years, we have been hearing from international observer organizations, from domestic observers, from the different political parties, that this is crucial to make sure that we move towards more proportional representation. And I think this is a great step, and as once again underlining, under the circumstances that the country has been going through for the last 5 months, with being pandemics, having special situation in the country, the process has not been stopped, and this is truly important to underline. I believe achievement of a similar consensus, it has underlined many times, but I think we need to be grateful to our international partners. And sometimes that's what friends are for, to make sure that if the two sides are not able to sit and discuss, I believe our moderators have done an amazing job in really putting this reform forward and really being there to support the negotiations. I also believe that Kakha has underlined, and I fully share, for many years, the domestic organizations have been very actively advocating for the reform, for the gender quotas. And I think it's also extremely important to make sure that the public understands it really well, why this is so important. I think having more proportional, more representative parliament will help, and will have a whole new stage for our political development as well in the new parliament that is going to be in place from 2020. Also, I believe there are certain maybe relatively smaller changes, but I think it still needs to be underlined, because on election day, there are going to be several improvements that our organization has been also actively advocating, such as, first of all, we all remember the cases of on election day around the polling stations, seeing the activists with the different forms of the notebooks, and it was always underlined by us, and I remember myself at least having 20 press conferences on that it is important to make sure that people do not even that small percentage and possibility of interference with the voters' will. I think it's important that government and the parliament has made a decision on that. Why I mentioned the government, I think it's a lot about political decision and responsibility. And I think this is important, and we are happy to see that reform. And there's going to be a certain limitation also on election day when it comes to surrounding the polling station, because I think it is an important step forward, which was also OECOD recommendation. I would also like to underline, when we talk about the pluralism and engagement, the change that we have seen when it comes to people with disabilities. On election day, they can choose their own polling stations to access. I think this is also a positive step, and I believe with a similar small but important steps, we can ensure the positive election environment and election day proceedings. I would also need to underline several challenges that we see ahead of us, and therefore I would start by, well, we are in pandemics. Based on professionals, in October it's still going to be a certain type or a certain stage of pandemics, and I think it is crucial to make sure that, first of all, the voters are informed and they are not afraid to go on elections, because we have seen internationally that actually pandemics has reflected on activity, on active participation of the voters. And I believe that this is crucial to make sure that we follow all the regulations while empowering voters to come and vote. I also believe, and I'm thankful to the Central Election Commission as well as to the Parliament, that CDD has actually developed a package of recommendations when it comes to pandemics and how to address the elections during pandemics. And we have seen a special commission developed in the Parliament. I would call following our recommendations, which is, once again, we are delighted to underline that the special commission is discussing actually the engagement, the procedures, and so on, to ensure that even though there's pandemics, there is still not a harm to the general trust towards the process. And I believe the transparency still needs to be there. I believe still the engagement at highest level still needs to be there. And I believe now is the time to really work hard on that and ensure that all the stakeholders are involved, are aware, and we all feel safe and secured, while ensuring the democratic principles are not under a threat when it comes to election day, as well as pre-elections and post-election period. I would also like to underline several, I believe, issues that needs to be addressed. We already see a disinformation in social in social channels. We have underlined about the problem of the polarization in media, in between political parties. And I believe really the highest standard of transparency, of inclusion is truly important, as well as being more open to the direct communication. And I believe one of the positive assets of the new era of communications, I believe it's extremely important to make sure that voters are aware of the processes and we all together address the disinformation. We have also been seeing a Central Election Commission being more prepared for cyber attacks or certain fears that might be coming on that side. And I think this is also truly important that we all understand the potential threat there, because there's so many issues that need to be addressed. And I think we need to be very thankful to our US partners. And I believe during this COVID process, we have seen several large and important projects launched on that direction, and we truly welcome this. I believe my last point here would be, we have underlined the importance of the reforms, but now I think it's really important to make sure the public, the voters, understand what is actually happening, what has been changed, what is going to be new, what is going to be happening, and why these changes have been important. So I would recommend a wide awareness raising campaigns on that. And I think it's, apart from only having stakeholders engaged and informed, I think it's crucially important not to forget the main beneficiaries of the process, which are our voters. And I think in that context, civil society, government, parliament needs to be very actively engaged with each other, ensuring that public is aware and there is a high trust towards the process. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. I'll be delighted to answer all the questions that might be coming on my side.
Ketevan, thank you so much indeed. I was off, for some technical reasons, but I believe that Khatuna presented you in the best way. I would not be able to do that in the way she did. I trust so. So that the best expression of the female solidarity.
No, actually, I did present myself, which I guess is also one of the best opportunities to do that. So no worries.
You have to say a couple words. So.
Then from the moment when I rejoined, I joined again this conversation. Let me thank you from what I've said, for a very passionate and very precise coverage, what happened, what's happening, what could be happening. So thank you so much indeed. I very much appreciate it. And frankly speaking, although I was off, but I had the gist of the story, and so I'm not very much behind. Okay, so thank you so much indeed, and let us raise some questions. If you don't mind, we're still on time, and again, with appreciation that Kaha has to leave us by 4 p.m. sharp, and we have to close the session. Kaha, let me start with you, please. Again, why I've been praising your honesty? Because I reserved a very sort of, a bit of awkward question for you. And therefore I put the trust and credibility on your shoulders, expecting that your response to the question would be as honest as your introduction was. When you spoke about all these recommendations, what is your view? Did you accept all the key recommendations, or to rephrase myself, where is the shortcomings? Where are the shortcomings? Did you feel any sort of, I'm not saying frustration, but feeling of dissatisfaction? That not all recommendations being reflected. So again, now please speak with us not as a vice speaker, but as an honest man and Kaha Kutchava. So please give us your insight.
Thank you, Victor. Interesting question, and I'll try to concentrate on the topics which was the subject of me discussing these issues as recommendations with our international partners as well. So there are two most critical questions I've been receiving. First of all, this is so-called limiting the radius of the election units, where the people can gather and what is the distance where you cannot even bother anyone who, whether it's an advertisement or polling or any questions. And the law the changes introduced 25 meters of the radius. And we've been asked why it is not the requested 100 meter. Actually, the explanation to this, that this is only 25, is very simple and very technical. We don't want to introduce any law which may not be enforceable. And in this case, the representing 100 meters would definitely be an unenforceable clause in the law, because what is the reality we have in Georgia? In most of the election units are located in schools, and in West Georgia, even in the houses, which means that putting more than 25 meters of the diameter of limiting people's even movement and etc. would cause many neighbors to leave their houses or not to leave their houses outside, or in case of schools, which is the biggest number of the election units being located, you would have not been able to use even bus stations, which means that someone getting around these 100 meters of the radius would definitely be the violation. And what would have been the aim of such change? That there would have been hundreds of reports that the law has been violated, and putting under the question the legitimacy of the election results, which of course we cannot introduce in the law because it will be an enforceable clause. So this is an explanation which is well received by the international society because it's explainable. It's not like we don't want this or we are not planning to do this. This is a very clear explanation that we don't want to introduce any law or any requirement which cannot be enforced. But it's worth to mention that as an the reaction from our political party on this issue was followed by the announcement of the executive secretary of the political party, an offer to any other political party who will take part in the elections to sign up the memorandum of understanding, like we did in 2016, that we will use whatever the recommendations were within the MOU part, and everyone would have their willingness to obey to this rule, which is a fair rule, but it shouldn't be related to every single person who lives around and wants to use the bus station or just wants to walk around the sidewalk, right? So that was surprising. Actually, it's even a question, surprising or not surprising, that the political parties, the two main opposition parties, of course, rejected this signing this memorandum of understanding because their aim is not to conduct high standard pre-elections, right? Their aim is to create as much tension as possible, so then to claim the illegitimacy of the election results. So, of course, we cannot allow this as a responsible government, and this was the very clear explanation for this reason. Second, biggest issue, which was asked to me was recounting of the ballots. And I came up with the statistics, which was very interesting. Actually, we have this practice. No one should say that we don't recount ballots. It's been done on the unit level. And when I recall the statistics of the last, which is the presidential election, it's been 3,000, up to 3,700 times of recounting the votes based on the request. In couple of units, election points, it's been recounted even 10 times, most often 3 or 4 times, which once again states that this mechanism exists, but introducing this mechanism on the second tier will just stop the process. So imagine all this time to be repeated on a second time. You will never, it will be never-ending process of having the final result. But opposite to this, so mechanism is there. No one should say that this mechanism does not exist. It's been introduced by us, and it's been quite well working and used by everyone who thinks that there might be mistake and it has to be recalculated or reaccounted. As an opposite to this, it's important to mention that transparency part is very crucial. Everyone, multi-party representation is there when it's calculated and counted, and everyone, even one person who has any kind of a issue can request it to be recalculated. So it's very easy to reach out for the results. This is 2 main points I would underline, which has explanation, and it's been well received to those whom we've been able to explain.
Okay, thank you, Kaha. So all in all, my conclusion though, from what you've described, that those, let's say, the shortcomings, or I'm not saying failures, like to take into account, would not have an impact on the fairness of the process, and would not have an impact, any negative impact or adverse impact on the, on the transparency of the process. To finish this, and my last point is that if you ask me, I would have been more than happy to have the fully election, how to say it, online voting, even how you call it, e-voting. So, right, I think this is the time for country to start adapting to this. This will exclude a lot of problems, a lot of issues. It's just the right mechanism to be introduced. And first of all, the cyber security part, because in this case, it will be a huge danger of our northern neighbors, the occupant neighbors, to try to intervene in this process. So this is what I think should be taken care of. Otherwise, e-elections is something that I think, e-voting is something that I think is the future of tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. So I have one. I mean, the one question to each of I will give you a response in 2 minutes. I'm not a good mathematician, but that gives me an estimate that will complete it by time, and it also give me at least 1 minute to say goodbye to the audience. So, Bacho, by the way, I was away again when you completed your presentation, so my apologies to you personally. So you spoke about the role of facilitators, and what you said, it resonated, with my assessment and my feeling. We should be extremely thankful to the facilitators, but we could not be completely happy as Georgians. That's the dilemma, and that's the contradiction which we hear. So on top of that intervention in a positive way by the facilitators, what are your takeaways? You spoke in one of your articles about the due constitutional process and et cetera, et cetera. How much the negotiations exposed the lack of respect, if you will, the lack of due order, of laying down those firm foundations of the constitutional order, constitutional stability. So just your insight and minute and a half, please.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Yes, that absolutely rightfully mentioned that it would have been, of course, better if our political establishment could achieve this consensus independently, but like nobody downplays, of course, the significant role of our political partners and diplomats. what I wanted to emphasize was the importance of the constitutional process and the consensus part. And up until March 8th agreement, I think the political actors were going to the right pace. However, whenever the process moved to the parliament, the major opposition groups excluded themselves from the voting, which I would say significantly harmed the entire process. And why? Because the election system, which is part of the constitution, should be adopted by vast majority. It should be part of a broad consensus. And again, sometimes I have an impression that the main motto of Georgian politics and politicians is to play a zero-sum game when one party is always a winner and the other party always loses. And I hope that this election will be a good opportunity for all of us to move up to the next level and start actually listening to each other more and sometimes making compromises, regardless of how difficult it is, because that is the political process and that is the responsibility of politicians. And I hope my constructive critics was accepted as a good wishes from a citizen who wants a better election environment in Georgia and a better future for this country.
Thank you, Bacho. So again, my very brief note that with the reform which we're undertaking now, we are sort of, we're getting away with the concept when a winner takes all, and that is very important. The conditions or preconditions, which and the formalities which we introduced or we will be introducing, that very poison concept would be swept away, and that's the key point. Ketevan, so my question to you, my perception, probably it's misperception, that what we're facing in the country, obviously, what we see, the positive reaction and the positive reaction assessment from our international partners, and same time, simultaneously, we have, I made a note, sort of, informational hybrid war, as if undermining the credibility of the changes. From your perspective, based on your experience, what else could be done? Because apparently it's so obvious that we made a good step, a huge step ahead, and still, that nagging feeling of some well-wishes, of course, in quotes. What else could be done to overcome, that misperception? So your insight, please.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I think I try to briefly tackle the issue because I believe the disinformation is also a very big challenge that our country is facing. And then facing upcoming elections, we could already see certain attacks on Central Election Commission. We could already see certain disinformation spread around the ongoing reform. Or trying to mislead the public opinion. Therefore, I believe, first of all, it's extremely important to ensure the more awareness-raising campaigns and more information available about the ongoing reforms. I honestly believe it is crucial to not only focus on certain stakeholders, only political parties' awareness about the reform or the changes that the constitution and the election code has been going through, but also I think it's crucially important to make sure the public understands the importance. You have mentioned, for example, winner takes all principle. I mean, there is nothing wrong with it if this is an agreement of the political and wider society. But I mean, in Georgian reality, we have been hearing and seeing for many years now that people, voters, as well as the political stakeholders have been actively advocating for direction of more pluralistic, more multi-party democracy. Therefore, I believe it is extremely important step that has been made when it comes to more proportional elections. But when it comes to going back to your question, I believe the hybrid war is really ongoing, and we have seen in many countries there are still investigations ongoing in certain Western countries about potential interference with election processes from the outside interest groups, and therefore I believe it is crucial. And I've been also mentioning several ongoing projects that we are aware of, for example, with the USAID support and IFAS engagement with the CEC, the Central Election Commission, when it comes to more cybersecurity. We are also part of the group that is going to be trained by our American partners when it comes to more the hygiene of the cybersecurity. I believe this is the new challenge that we all, the stakeholders, the engaged, the observers, the voters, the parties need to be aware about. And I think this is something that we need to be addressing and challenge that. I believe also the communication rules have been changing, and I think it is extremely important to directly address when it comes to disinformation, to really have the correct information available for people on all the different channels, and try to reach out to majority of the voters by different ways of channels, and really having a strong messaging when it comes to really countering disinformation and propaganda. So thank you once again for the opportunity.
Yeah, so thank you so much indeed. Again, to emphasize having a proper knowledge and proper education goes hand by hand, with every single type of political reform, that's obvious, that's inescapable. So Khatuna, the last question is a very broad and fundamental question. So you have a sort of, the cherry picking question, if you will, and cherry picking response would follow. In your view, how does this constitutional reform improve democracy quality in Georgia? So very brief, precise, and short statement, please.
I'll try to do my best. Thank you very much for this question. The leading mechanism through which it improves the quality of democracy is, of course, political pluralism, which guarantees the power sharing and political representation, greater political representation. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that the proportional electoral system is the most compatible with the parliamentary system, in which political party lay in cooperation through deliberation and consent, because it's believed that consensus-based policies can enhance procedural democracy and can produce appropriate political outcomes. This is a very brief.
Thank you so much indeed. So, dear friends and dear colleagues, thank you so much indeed. May I just conclude that we're trying to reconcile sometimes irreconcilable things, when it comes to transition democracy, keeping political stability, keeping political order, and same time accomplishing an art of compromise and inclusivity. Sometimes these are apparently irreconcilable things, but if we would manage to do that, that would message to the Georgian public and to the other international audience the next level of Georgian political maturity. And that is very important. That's why, this election reform is very important. As I said, that's a big step forward to hopefully changing political standards and political elites, and also embarking on qualitatively new development stage. That's what we badly need, and that's what we aspire for. So thank you again very much indeed. I'm so happy that we're Georgians becoming so disciplined and so well organized. We're completely on time. And thank you very much indeed, Kaha. All the best to you, and thank you so much indeed for joining us. Special thanks to Ketevan. Your participation made our discussions really very much valuable. So, and thank you to my colleagues and fellows in Geocase, to Khatuna, Burkadze, and to Bacho, Tortladze. So thank you to everyone who has joined us, and thank you for your attention, for your patience. We'll definitely see each other next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you
so much, Victor.
Thank you so much.